And Scott, I would just kind of announce the issue with you acting as chair tonight at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Scott, we're now live.
Okay, good evening. It's 6:30 p.m., May 12th, and this is our Animal Services Advisory Committee meeting. My name is Scott Alonso. I'll be serving as temporary chair tonight as our normal chair, Caitlin Quinn, is unavailable, and she may be here a little bit later. But we're going to call the meeting to order and then do a roll call, please.
Great, thank you. Quinn, Alonso.
Here.
Kawaoka.
Here.
Balshaw. I see.
Sorry, here.
Thank you. And Fisher.
Here.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, clerk. We do have quorum, so we will proceed with tonight's meeting. And now we will open general public comment for the meeting. During general public comment, the public is invited to make comments on items of public interest that are within the committee's subject matter jurisdiction and that are not listed on the current agenda, including the two presentation items. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. And we, depending on how many people are in attendance tonight, we may have no more than 20 minutes of public comment. And any received public comments were distributed to the committee and placed on the agenda on the city's website. We did receive a few of those by email. And we'll open it up for general public comment. Are there any hands raised? Aaron.
Thank you, Scott. Those wishing to participate in general public comment must raise their virtual hand and wait to be called on by the moderator. Speakers are reminded to be respectful in their comments. Threats of violence in the city are grounds for removal from this meeting. A countdown will appear for the convenience of the speaker and viewers. Your microphone will be muted at the end of that countdown. The first speaker will be acknowledged and invited to speak when the countdown begins. Please make sure to unmute yourself when you're invited to do so. At this point, we have 5 speakers with their hands raised. First speaker that I have is Susan Kirks. I will now allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and begin.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Oh, hey, Scott Alonso. I didn't know you were on this committee, so I'm really pleased to be able to make a general comment tonight. And thank you for serving on this committee. You do so many things in Sonoma County. So, and also I saw that Caitlin's the chair. So I was kind of hoping to say hello to her too. I live here in Petaluma, and I just wanted to say before I talk about my topic that I was thinking about the history of animal services today. And when I moved to Petaluma many years ago, I remember going to the animal shelter, what I thought was the shelter, and it was 2 small trailers in the same location where our wonderful animal services building is now. And I remember being so confused. I could not believe the low level of attention and contribution to animal services of the city of Petaluma. And I just think it's really helpful for people who've lived here for a long time to sometimes come forward and think about how far we've come and say how grateful I am, and I know so many people are, for North Bay Animal Services and what you are providing to the community. The quality and the level of care are just really astounding, and I really appreciate it. But also what I wanted to quickly comment about was, I know that you all are going on wildlife calls as well. And I wanted to thank Mark Scott, because he got back to me really quickly this weekend when a juvenile badger was discovered on someone's porch on the west side of Petaluma. And it took a little trip out to wildlife rescue. And I was really happy to reconnect with Mark and look forward to talking with the animal control officers. And I provided some written information because I have helped animal services in the past when there have been needed rescues of badgers in our area. Badger is a native mammal, and we have a significant small population here in Petaluma. The only other location where the population is similar and also as significant is on the Sonoma County coast. So I wanted to just again say thank you to Mark Scott and for the great service that was provided. And I was able to connect with Doris at Wildlife Rescue. And this was just a little juvenile badger who lost its way. In the summertime now, beginning usually June to August, that's when these little badgers are dispersing, and sometimes they find themselves in unusual places, simply trying to find water and prey. So again, thank you again for letting me comment, and I'll stay for as much of your meeting as I can.
Thank you. The next speaker that we have is Mark Kimberly. I'll now allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and begin.
I spoke at the last committee meeting about what North Bay Animal Services, at the direction of Mark Scott, had done to my 18-year-old cat, Katie, and about the way they had handled Katie's case after her death, stonewalling me in my attempts to get her medical records and lying about what had happened and then falsifying records. In short, they picked up Katie from near my house and had her illegally euthanized less than 2 hours later, despite the fact that according to the results of a medical examination, she was uninjured and needed only the most basic care: food, water, and warming. I warned that the city was being put at risk of legal and financial liability. I asked the city to do something, namely to arrange for an investigation of NBAS by the Internal Affairs Division of Petaluma Police Department. But the city has done nothing. Therefore, I was forced to continue investigating on my own. And what I've discovered is astonishing. NBAS has defaulted on their duties under the Professional Services Agreement in many ways. Page 4, Section 7 calls for mandatory employee background checks. They failed to prove that these background checks have ever been done. Page 15, Exhibit A, Section 1, makes it mandatory for them to provide shelter and medical care for stray animals. They failed to do this, as they are euthanizing animals rather than provide medical care. Page 18, Section 2B, calls for animal control officers to qualify for the use of their approved firearms on a quarterly basis. They failed to do this. This means we have officers running around Petaluma with loaded guns and inadequate training. Look, let's just face it, folks. NBAS is totally corrupt. They call themselves a no-kill shelter in order to keep their contract with the city, maintain public support, and obtain new contracts with other cities. But they kill animals at will in order to save money on medical costs. Then they falsify their records to hide that fact. Then they default on the contract by failing to provide services they promised. These are egregious criminal offenses, some of which rise to the felony level. The people and animals of Petaluma are at risk, and it's got to stop. I've retained an attorney who has sent his first certified letter to NBAS. They will undoubtedly ignore it, as they did with all the ones I sent. A lawsuit will follow. I've also filed complaints with the state of California. I'll be meeting with that investigator soon. All it takes to stop it is this. City of Petaluma initiates a complete investigation of NBAS, and a third-party unbiased firm performs a forensic audit of all the records, not just the financial records, but the animal care records. If NBAS has nothing to hide, they wouldn't object to these audits and investigations, which would clear their name, right?
Thank you. The next speaker that I have is Jessica. I'll now allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and begin.
My two dogs, Rocket and Chloe, were euthanized on November 9th, 2020, without my knowledge by North Bay Animal Services. I had to leave my abusive ex in July 2020 with my 1-year-old baby. I was homeless and could not take my dogs with me. I trusted he would take care of them. And since I had a domestic violence restraining order against him, we were only allowed to communicate about our baby. I found out in February of 2021 during mediation that he got rid of the dogs. He wouldn't tell me more, so I asked his sister for more information. She told me that she urged my ex to surrender them and that he took the dogs to the same place we adopted them from. That was all the info she would give me. We adopted Chloe and Rocket at separate times from Petaluma Animal Services. I called NBAS, assuming my dogs were taken there and ideally had been adopted out. I wanted to know where my dogs were and if they were safe and happy. At this time, I still thought they were alive. When I called NBAS, Mark Scott told me that since I was not the owner, he could only give me limited information on the dogs, and he said that they were euthanized per the request of the owner. I told him I was the owner, my name is on the paperwork, and their microchips. And he said I could be anyone and I can't prove that I am the owner until I come in with documentation and ID. So I did. I provided everything Mark requested as well as a restraining order in hopes that I would get all the information as to why my dogs were euthanized without my consent or knowledge. Of course, I never got any information from Mark Scott or Gina Orseth, who was also there, even though they assured me they would give me everything I had requested on the dogs. Thankfully, I did get documents and information from the city of Petaluma when I requested it. Here is what I found out. My ex's sister called on November 7th, stating she was the owner of Chloe and Rocket and reported they killed chickens and she wanted to surrender them. She brought them in the next day on November 8th, signed as owner and requested euthanasia, paid $84 for their euthanasia fee and left. They were euthanized the next day. This means that I can take my neighbor's pet to NBAS, say I am the owner, and pay $42 to euthanize the animal, as long as I am a resident of Petaluma. Why would Mark not give me any information on my dogs, even after I proved I was the owner, but would let a stranger walk in, sign as owner, and request euthanization? Per Sue Davies' email response to my many questions, this was not an investigation or a case of a dangerous animal. So why did Gina Orseth request statements from everyone involved in these alleged dog attacks 4 months after my dogs had died? The sister signed the euthanasia request form, and right above her signature, it states, I certify to the best of my knowledge that the described animal has not bitten an animal or human in the past 10 days. She said the dogs kill chickens the day before she signed. This means they were not held for rabies for 10 days per the state of California law. How is state law completely disregarded? Had these rules been followed, I would have possibly had a chance to save my dogs.
Sorry, Jessica. I had to mute you. Your time has expired. The next speaker that we have is Sale White. I will now allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and begin. Sale, you are now allowed to speak. You can unmute yourself and begin.
Hi, is this working now?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, I am extremely concerned about the lack of integrity shown by NBAS and records that it has presented to the city and to the public. In February, I requested all animal intake and case records for the 14-month period starting January 1st, 2020. I found that a great many of these records made no sense. For instance, 7 animals that had fit the description appears normal at intake showed up in the records as having been cremated. 9 animals that appeared normal upon intake had an outcome of dead on arrival. How could this happen? Could this be related to the fact that 1 in every 6 animal intake records was altered after the animal's outcome had been entered into the software? Looking at the animal control cases paints an even grimmer picture. Most disturbing are the bite cases. California's Public Health Code Section 2606 requires a 5-day rabies hold for all animals that have bitten another animal or a person. At the end of those 5 days, the animals must be cleared by a veterinarian before being released. A shelter that violates this ordinance is creating a serious public health hazard. The data for NBAS bite cases is very disturbing. The case records indicate 126 calls to animal control reporting bites, 74 of which were bites to humans. Despite this, there were only 2 rabies holds noted in the intake data, both for the same dog. This is a very serious situation and a great legal risk to both NBAS and the city of Petaluma. But wait, there's more. I described a few very questionable cases in the public comments I submitted via email. Here are a few others. A case record states that Mark Scott impounded 2 pit bull puppies on the evening of December 2nd as a police assist. There is no intake record for any puppy for the entire week of December 2nd. What happened to these puppies? Then there is the Chihuahua Empress, who was involved in 5 animal control cases, including a bite case, 2 police assists, a leash law violation, and finally, a call for a sick or injured animal. Her health status on the day of that call was unhealthy, untreatable, but her intake status was deceased. The intake type was a service in for cremation services, meaning that the death of poor Empress was never counted in the shelter statistics, since service in animals are not considered to be in the custody of the shelter. What actually happened to Empress? Finally, there are the 2 juvenile cats, Sari and Demise, that were transferred in from Marin. What was the intake condition of these cats? Deceased. The outcome for both of these cats was reported 3 weeks later. This outcome was died. What actually happened to Sari and Demise? Perhaps the city of Petaluma is okay with this level of dishonesty and incompetence, but the people of the city are not. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker we have is Amy Taylor. I'll now allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and begin.
Good evening. I am speaking tonight to express my alarm at the many obvious problems with the data provided by North Bay Animal Services. It is clear to everyone with even a basic knowledge of animal welfare that North Bay Animal Services is killing animals and is hiding the euthanasia in these vague categories. Dogs who bite humans end up in a service in when they've actually been euthanized. Why are they not in the euthanized category? Because that doesn't show up in their statistics. That's why. Why do the numbers not match up along with separate reports? Simply put, they are lying to the public and hiding the truth so they can retain their contracts and collect more tax money. My sincere hope is that the city of Petaluma, the city that I love so much and all the animals in it, is not complicit in this deception. The silence of the city has displayed the response to North Bay Animal Services, clear violations of the law and the killing of beloved pets has me very worried that the potential corruption within the city leadership. I would like to hear city leaderships denounce the killing of animals in our community. North Bay Animal Services does this while pretending to be a no-kill shelter. The city has financial responsibilities with our tax money to use as directed. Nobody has directed you to take our money and kill animals. There's a duty to oversee the contractor. Why in the previous contractors always had to provide detailed reports every month, and North Bay Animal Services only generates self-reports that doesn't really provide any real data. Where are your voices? If you're sitting back on this council and you're silent, we'll just define you as you need to speak up and stop being silent because it will define your position on this matter. And I'm sick and tired of hearing stories of people's animals getting killed over and over and over again at the hands of Mark Scott. So if things need to change, and if the city of Petaluma isn't going to address these issues, it's going to be a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. And at this point, Acting Chair Alonso, we do not have anyone else with their hand raised.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. We will then close general public comment, and folks can comment on agenda items later on as we go through. So next we will look to the meeting minutes and approval of those minutes from January of 2021. Does any committee member have any suggested edits or comments about the minutes? And seeing nobody raise their hand virtually, we will approve the minutes without any changes. And then moving along, we do not have any presentations, old business, or updates tonight, and we will move on to agenda item number 8, which is new business. And the first item under new business is the annual report from North Bay Animal Services for calendar year 2020. And we will have staff from North Bay Animal Services present, and also any city staff that want to make comments as well.
Okay, thank you. Let me get settled here. Okay, I'm Sue Davey. I'm the communications coordinator for North Bay Animal Services. So welcome tonight to the public, to the Animal Services Advisory Committee, to staff. Thank you for joining us tonight. We put this presentation together to give you an overview of what 2020 looked like for us as we deliver services to the Petaluma community. We have some staff members here tonight and some board members too, who are all available to answer questions that you might have. But first things first, a little history and level setting. Up until the late 1990s or so, Animal Services was contracted out to what is now Humane Society of Sonoma County. At that time, it was a very different organization. I hesitate to even make that connection because the funding, commitment, flavor was almost a 180 from what that organization has grown into today. But at the time, a group of animal welfare enthusiasts advocated for a more stable structure that consisted of a Petaluma City Animal Services Department reporting into the police department with a fundraising and advocacy team called the Animal Services Advisory Committee. In 2011, the city proposed cutting the animal services budget by eliminating one animal control officer position. 2 volunteers and the manager at the time recognized that this would effectively shut down animal control services and hamstring the shelter in providing adequate services to the community. We formed a nonprofit and proposed a different model. Our timing was too late for that budget cycle, but the animal control officer position was spared and a dialogue started about the future of animal services. In 2012, that nonprofit won the contract and enjoyed support from the community while building new expectations about animal services for Petaluma. 6 years later, the contract went out to bid. Mark and I both had experience with the former nonprofit and had ideas about how we could improve the services to pets and people, and here we are today. We've seen changes in the city team since we were awarded the contract in August 2018. A new city manager, a new assistant city manager, new council liaison to the Animal Services Advisory Committee, and some new members to the committee as well. Our staff and board are a mix of employees and volunteers with experience from every iteration of the past and brand new folks as well. We tip our hat to the past and take what we've learned from all of those experiences, nonprofit, city staff run, and then nonprofit again, to march firmly into the future. Our mission remains the same, to provide comprehensive animal services to the North Bay community that results in fewer homeless animals, greater pet retention, and happier families. The way we deliver on that promise evolves as needs change. At the last Animal Services Advisory Committee meeting, a couple of decisions were made around meetings and reports from NBAS. First, the 4 yearly meetings will now be held in February, May, August, and November. Second, our annual and biannual reports will cover the calendar year or calendar year midpoint rather than the city's fiscal year or NBAS's contract anniversary schedule. Therefore, moving forward, the first meeting of each year in February will include the annual report for the prior year. The third meeting of the year in August will include the biannual report for the first 6 months of the current year. 2021 will be a little bit different in that this meeting, the second in the year, is our opportunity to share the comprehensive data of our 2020 report and our observations. At our next meeting, you'll hear about our first 6 months of 2021. Just wanted to summarize what had happened in the last meeting and make sure we were all on the same page. So let's get started. Tonight, we'll talk about the highlights from 2020. No surprise about what changed everything for all of us. Then we'll get to talk about data, some services data, as well as some budget information. We'll take next a glimpse into the future and finally end with some Q&A from the committee. No secret, the pandemic changed everything for all of us, and it's our biggest highlight from last year. In the early days of shutting our doors to the public, we cleaned and got used to life without the public or our valued volunteers. It was weird. This vibrant public space was quiet in an uncomfortable, anticipatory way. Once it was clear that pets couldn't transmit the virus to each other or their people, we quickly pivoted into solution mode for what was to become a long shelter in place. While our doors may have been closed to walk-in traffic, our services never stopped and were more in demand than ever. We figured out how to facilitate adoptions through video conference. We added more phone lines to accommodate the change from in-person questions to phone calls and stayed abreast of PPE protocols, especially for our field staff. Along with a different mode for adoptions, many in our community needed help providing care for their pets. We delivered food, cat litter, crates, baby gates to help people keep their pets happy and healthy. An unintended consequence of the shutdown was that vets closed their offices. Through our licensing program, we pushed out license expiration dates and forgave late fees for those who needed to update their pets' rabies vaccinations because they simply could not get vet appointments. I think probably everybody on this call experienced the same thing. The staff took this opportunity to cross-train and strengthen their already tight bond to support the work and each other. We rode the roller coaster as an organization and essential services provider throughout the summer, and then the fires hit. In Petaluma, we're indirectly affected. Last fall, we provided mutual aid for 4 fires. 2 big shelters to the north were evacuated. 2 big animal shelters were evacuated. We housed some of their animals, but more importantly, we took care of owned pets left behind when owners had to evacuate, and their local shelter staff didn't have a staging area to work from because of their own evacuations. It was hard work, made more difficult with PPE in place and COVID protocols to be aware of. Mark, is there anything that you want to add around the fires that you were involved in?
Hi, yes, absolutely. One thing I would like to do is for our next meeting, if we can make a note to make disaster response and fire commitment that we've been involved in and will continue to be involved in. But if we can put together a presentation around that for our next meeting, would be great. I think that's it, Sue.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Coming out of 2020, we know that the new services that grew out of that year are here to stay. You can look forward to the continuation of the extended service hours, a plentiful pet pantry with delivery option, and video conference facilitated adoptions. Let's take a look at the data. What do these numbers show us? So I know last time we did talk through what some of these categories meant, but I do want to take a minute and just refresh everybody's memory. If you're not in it day-to-day, it's not always self-explanatory. Intakes. These are the number of animals that we bring into our care. For domestic animals who are not where they're supposed to be or they're unattended, they come in as in the category of seized if an officer brings them in, or stray if a member of the public brings them in. So that's that top intake number that you see. The majority are cats and dogs. The other designation, the 35 in this column. Anything from chickens to guinea pigs to reptiles. So those are the domestic animals that come in that you'd see under stray. OGS is our shorthand for owner, guardian, surrender. When an owner can no longer care for their pet for any number of reasons, we can bring that animal into our care. Transfers. When our population is low, we reach out to our partners to help ease their crowded shelters. Those numbers are reflected in transfer. Wildlife. This one's everything but domestic animals and doesn't include livestock either. We don't handle livestock. And then clinic services, microchips. This is a service designation that technically lives under intakes, but isn't really an intake. These animals are publicly owned animals in our care for a short period of time, for example, to get a microchip or a spay-neuter surgery or for cremation services, or they're owned animals that may be with us a little bit longer for boarding. We do this when owners are in crisis and they need our help. Moving to the lower part of the screen are the outcomes. Adoptions is our first category. This is when we help animals find new homes. RTO, shorthand for return to owner. These are the animals that come into our care as strays, and we're able to reunite them with their owners based on any kind of identification like a microchip, license, maybe they've got some kind of identification tag or a notation on their collar, and also through lost and found postings on social media. Transfers refer to the animals that we bring in, that we may outcome to our partner organizations. If a particular group is better equipped to handle a specific kind of issue or a type of pet, we transfer animals out to those organizations. The Rohnert Park Shelter is a good example of this. They have an amazing domestic rabbit program, and every adopter who's looking for a rabbit goes to the Rohnert Park Shelter first. So if they have space and if we've got a rabbit or two that might be lingering in our shelter, we reach out to them and transfer that rabbit to them. The large number under other reflects our wildlife. So transfer other right here, this 135, that reflects our wildlife transfer outs. We partner with Sonoma County Wildlife and we transfer all of our wildlife to them, like deer, raptors, badgers, because they can provide the proper care for those kinds of animals. Euthanasia reflects the small number of animals that we humanely euthanize. This number includes animals that come to us who are irredeemably suffering from injury or medical condition, and animals who are aggressive to humans may also be euthanized. Our next two categories, died and DOA. DOA refers to animals that are deceased before coming into our care. We still try and match those up with owners based on any information, any identification that that animal may have, so that we can try and reunite them with their families. Died refers to animals that pass away while they're in our care. The large number under other reflects those deceased wildlife. Usually those are victims of a traffic incident. And then finally, clinic service CHIP. This is the outcome counterpart to the intake clinic services CHIP. So anytime that we intake an animal in that designation, we do a corresponding outcome back to their owner. Are there any questions about these categories or any numbers that you see? I realize that these numbers are sort of out of context, but later we're going to get to the comparison between 2019 and 2020 numbers, and that's where I think we may have a little more discussion. But any questions at this point?
Sue, it's still Linda Fisher. I have a quick question. So your intake for services was 120, but the outcome was 131. What's that 11 differential there?
So,
I mean, wouldn't they align? So whoever you're taking in for a service, that animal is going right back out to whoever requested the service?
could be. So intake clinic outcome. So let's think about intake clinic for spay neuter, for example. They come in and they're going to have a corresponding outcome in that clinic designation as well. Service boarding is a similar situation. There are times when we may intake into service and we may end up outcoming out into adoption. If, for example, that owner decided that this animal, after getting some service from us, may not be the right fit for them, and they surrender that animal over to us. So in general, you do have a one-to-one relationship, but there are some exceptions there.
So for the cats, for instance, so you had 67 come in for service, but you had 83 go out. How is that possible?
The other part that is possible is that we do have animals that carry over from one year to the next. So, you know, December 1999 to 2000. Mm-hmm. Another thing that happens is that an animal may come in as a stray, and then it may service, like a cat, may service out as a trap neuter return. So if we get in a stray cat and it is determined that it's not really, bound for a home type situation through adoption, then that would be an outcome service of trap neuter return.
And where would it go?
There are colonies that exist around Petaluma that we have colony caretakers who feed and take care of those cats as their own. And we check with those colony owners to see if there's space or if that works for them.
Okay, and then the other question I have is about transfers. So you're transferring animals in when there's overcrowding elsewhere, or tell me more about the in and out of transfers.
Sure. When we've got space, we bring animals into our care to, accomplish a number of things. One, we have some expertise that other shelters may not have. We're able to accommodate bottle baby kittens, for example. And a shelter like Oakland doesn't have enough volunteers who can handle things like bottle baby kittens. So they put the word out and they say, we've got 6 litters of 2-week-old kittens, who can help us? If we've got space, we bring them into our program, and space and resources, which means we have the volunteers to take them into their care as well. So that's one way that we transfer. Another way we transfer, it's usually, so we get a cry for help from another shelter, and if we can offer help, we do by transferring those animals in. Or there's a situation like during the fires where we're out there in the sheltering world, and some shelter says, you know what, we're going to get an influx of animals. We need, again, a cry for help. We could really use to free up some space in our shelter. What can you take on?
Okay, and then the transfers out, do you pay attention to, do you track then what happens to the animals that leave your care?
We do. We do, in that one way we do that is that these are trusted shelter partners. So we are not going to transfer these animals out to a high kill shelter. They're never going to want to transfer them in anyway. They're overcrowded. They're not going to take an animal from us. They're well respected in the community. So, for example, if we have a purebred German Shepherd Rescue would love to take that animal from us, transfer from us. If that makes sense for us at the time, we would transfer that animal out to them. So we keep track in an unofficial way in terms of we watch their social media posts, we see those animals, we see the happy outcomes that ensue. But once an animal leaves our care, they leave our ownership. In California, animals are property, they're considered property and they're owned. So just like if I gave, I don't know, if I gave you my car and you decided to paint it purple, I really couldn't tell you that that wasn't okay with me. Mm-hmm. Similarly, once we transfer an animal out of our care, we don't have purview over it to tell the next owner how they're going to treat that animal or what they're going to do with it.
Okay. And then I had a question on a few slides up, if I might, before we get too far. And that is about our meetings. And at which meeting will you be providing the audit of your financials to us?
So that's further on in the agenda that we can talk about when we get to that one.
Great. Okay, thank you so much.
Any other questions?
And Sue, if I may, I mean, can you talk a little bit? I mean, the animal welfare community is pretty tight knit and small, and you know, you folks have a lot of relationships in the county and elsewhere. So, can you talk a little bit about finding transfer partners or what that process is like? And
sure. And
just, you know, how you build up that relationship.
Sure. You're right. The animal welfare world is fairly small, and it is based on relationship and experience. We have a lot of rescues in Sonoma County who mainly take animals from the Central Valley, from Mexico, from Lake County, from other parts of California. So it's less likely that they need to take animals from us. But when they do have some expertise in a particular area, or if we just don't have the volunteer that can foster a cat or a dog that needs something special, we definitely reach out to those folks that we've worked with in the past who have been amenable to transfer animals in from us. And we put the word out, just like any shelter does, to ask if they've got space. Sometimes we can transfer a dog or a cat in from them, and they can take one of our animals in exchange. So it's a very symbiotic relationship.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Sue, it's not on here, but on the other information that you sent to us, the annual report, you have something called TNR and barn cats that I don't know if it's showing up on this data or not.
That's the trap, neuter, return program. So they're also called barn cats or working cats or vineyard cats. Those are those cats that probably that aren't going to do well in an adopted home, an adoption situation. And so we find a working situation for them. We do hear from folks that at least half of those cats do turn into friendly cats that end up in people's homes. So yeah, those numbers are under the services.
Ah, okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, I'm going to keep moving. Next, let's see. This is our calls for services data. So anytime an animal control officer is called out either by the public or other organizations, that gets tracked in one of these categories. And one thing I do want to point out, as I was looking at this and I was trying to think about how people see these numbers and this jargon, because it really is, you know, very specific to animal welfare. There is not a direct correlation between the at-large stray calls and the number of intake seized stray that we saw in previous slides. And that's because these numbers reflect any time that there is a call for service, but with strays or at large, by the time the officer arrives on the scene, the dog may have already returned home on their own and is unable to be located. Or if the animal's still around and has identification like collar, tag, license tag, or chip, the officer can return that dog to the owner without bringing the dog to the shelter. So therefore, no intake with the type of stray is recorded. So you may see higher numbers in calls for service for stray at large than you would necessarily see for intake seized, which would be those numbers of animals that had an intake by an officer. Does that make sense?
So are you saying that the number here, the at-large stray, you're saying that might include return to owner, but that
in the field
isn't necessarily included in the RTOs on the previous slide. So RTOs on the previous slide were only animals that were actually brought into the shelter?
That's correct. Any animal that crosses the threshold will be an intake, but an animal that's returned in the field, so an officer picks up a stray dog and then returns it because it could not, the officer could knock on the door, the address is on the tag, that would not be counted as an intake into the shelter.
Do you have any idea of that 514, how many of those were actually returned to owner in the field?
About 100.
Wow.
Yeah, it is the best practice in animal welfare to adequately provide services, but do as much as you can to keep animals from having to enter into the shelter system. And, I think it's important to note as well that an animal that's returned in the field to the owner does not incur any kind of fees associated with impounding that animal or bringing that animal into care. So it's great for the pet. It's great for the pet owner. I mean, we really want to do what's right for the public, but we are providing a service and that we're not recouping any fees for that service. But when I say that, I want to make sure that that doesn't get misconstrued, because we're not in this business to make money. We're not going to make money on the backs of stray animals. We're going to do what's right for that animal.
And if I can make an added note to this for you, when you say at large and stray, also remember this isn't always dogs. It can also be cats that may have gone into a neighbor's yard who doesn't care for it. And
absolutely correct.
So think, you can't catch a cat. By the time the officers get there, the cat is long gone.
Yes, that's correct. And I think, Mark, too, you have witnessed some at-large rabbits and guinea pigs, reptiles. So yeah, thank you for that correction.
And Sue, this is Delinda again. Because this is jargon and I'm new to this, could you just quickly go through each line and just give me a sense of what it means?
I can, but you know what? I think I'm going to pass this to Mark because this is his forte.
Thank you. So if you're just talking each line that's on the slide now, the cruelty and neglect. So what that is when a call comes in for service, that's either the caller is giving us the assumption that there is something wrong with the animal or the owner has not provided the proper care for it. So the call gets taken in as a or it gets logged as a cruelty neglect investigation. That doesn't mean that the person is going to get prosecuted. It just means that's their assumption. It could be an old injured dog that's had an old injury that's been to the vet many times, but upon your first sight of it, you would assume someone's not caring for it. Dog could have cancer, and likewise with the cat. So a lot of times an officer will start the investigation, and when they get to the scene and see the animal and pick it up and scan it and talk to the owner, it may not, the end result may not be that actual neglect. There are times when that does actually happen, and we have to work with the owner to try to make sure that they're following up on their vet visits. Try to keep the animal either, surrendered to the shelter so we can care for it. So those can kind of go many different ways, but oftentimes it's the untrained eye that may see something they're not quite sure of. I don't know if you want to go down each one, but the animal bites, again, that's someone reporting an animal bite either to a person or to another animal. That requires an officer's response. I noticed in some of the comments there was questions about bites. A lot of times Sonoma County is required to do the mandated bite reporting, so we let them do the quarantine process, and they will actually release the dog. But we will go out and do the investigation because it's in our city jurisdiction. So it says 130. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow up on that a little bit. With bite calls, you'll see that there's a high number there. It's 113. But a lot of things can happen between the time that somebody calls in and the time an officer gets there. I think the city is 13.2 square miles driving across town. It could be that the offending dog is already gone by the time the officer arrives. Could be that the bitten dog's owner wasn't able to get contact information. So in those situations, the call comes in and it's classified as a bite, but there's no further action that can be taken. And I think just to put a fine point on Mark's information, the local animal shelters, of which NBAS is one, is not responsible for holding dogs or cats who have bitten to do, we're not responsible for doing that rabies hold. That is the responsibility of the Sonoma County, the county shelter. So we are able to, under their direction, to hold an animal and let that dog or cat do their bite quarantine in our shelter, but it's not under our direction nor our purview. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
I'm not quite understanding that, Sue.
So it is by state law, the county animal services provider, which is in our case, Sonoma County Animal Services, is responsible for continuing the investigation and really completing any investigation around an animal bite. And that includes doing the bite quarantine, overseeing the bite quarantine for any particular animal.
But you do, either you do the quarantine, you don't take it to Sonoma County Animal Services to do the quarantine, or do you?
No. So let me kind of back up a little bit. Let's say your dog bites your neighbor and you call us out to do an investigation. We come out, we get your information, we get your neighbor's information. We take down the pictures of the bite, we take down the dog's rabies information, and we gather all that data and we send it to Sonoma County Animal Control. We'll then log a 10-day quarantine on your dog. Your dog then can be quarantined at your house as long as it doesn't leave the property. Or if you don't feel safe, which in many cases it happens, you can bring your dog to the shelter and we provide that quarantine space here. A lot of the times two dogs don't get along, or you introduce a new dog into your home and it bites your child. The last thing you want to do is go to bed not sure what's going to happen. So sometimes, and it doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes people will bring us a dog for us to house while that quarantine period is ongoing. Once the 10 days is up, then the dog can be returned to the owner or surrendered or what the next step would be. But that's the typical process Sonoma County charges for bite quarantines. And all we would charge for is if you actually boarded your dog with us. And that's $32 per day. But you're absolutely able to quarantine your dog in your home during that process. The last part of the bite and dangerous dog investigation that the officers are involved in, per the Petaluma Municipal Code, we have a dangerous, potentially dangerous statute. So we make sure that if a bite qualifies for one of those criteria, it meets the demand of a potentially dangerous dog abatement order placed, then that's why we would still be involved to enforce that abatement. So I'm going to keep going unless anybody else has questions.
Just really quick, Mark, if you have proof that your animal is currently vaccinated, rabies is the concern, of course, do you still have to hold them for 10 days? You
still do, correct. There's a few exceptions when it becomes like your animal has bitten and it's it's in the position of passing away, where a vet can make a recommendation on euthanizing and then having the body tested, but those are rare. Let's see. So barking complaint, when you call about your neighbor's dog that's up all night barking, we've really seen those go down during COVID, and which is nice because those are really one of the hardest things for us to do. It's hard to find out when the dog's barking. It's hard to prove it. Most people don't have video of the dog barking, so it's hard to enforce as well. You have to do a detailed log of the barking complaint, and nobody really wants to sit there and write down when your neighbor's dog's barking and it's annoying already, and then you have to keep a log. So it's really hard and difficult, but we really saw those go down with COVID because most people were home with their animals. So that one really has changed. One of the things we've seen with the 2020 data. Owner assist could be anything. It could be you need your dog, you're elderly and you can't pick up your dog to take it to the vet. You don't have transportation. It could be you need your dog surrendered, but you don't have a way to get it here. So an owner assist means we send an officer out to assist and for various different reasons, and we just categorize it all under owner assist. But more than likely, it's someone elderly who can't transport their dog for them. And I know when we talked about in the earlier stages of like there was a dog that had passed away, that Empress that came up earlier. That dog had passed away from a person who was houseless, and the shelter provided cremation services for that person. So we just really try to do as best for the owners as we can, regardless of their statute. Patrols, the officers are out quite a bit, patrolling, making sure people are abiding by the law. We're not everywhere. We're not at all of the different times. I know people would like us out a little more at Wiseman and also at the water towers, but that's 3,000 patrols that the officers went on. During COVID, it became a little bit more tricky trying to make contact for something as having your dog off leash. So the officers were kind of recommended that unless this is really a violation, that just kind of go easy on these people that are in their own corners. We really didn't want to have more contact in the beginning of the COVID stages. Police assist.
So hold on. So that's its own line item. So it means it's not any of these others. Is it a call or is it just from just?
So that's an officer. So that's an officer going out every day, just doing their due diligence and checking all the different parts. That's not a call for service. That's an officer making the call themselves, in a sense. If I go out and I do 10 patrols a day, then I would log those 10 calls that I check these parks, once a day or however many I did that day. So that's not a call for service, but it logs under the same data for officer like involvement.
And do you ticket people for not being on leash, or what do you do there?
So typically, so we patrol a lot and we know the people that we see. And what we do is the first time I see you off leash and I say, hey, would you put your dog on a leash? Let me get your information. This is the law. We get your basic information, make sure your dog's licensed. And if your dog's not licensed, we send you a warning letter along with a warning letter that says you can't be off leash. So it's kind of a two-part thing. We don't just ticket you on first sight. The second time I see you, it's a different story because obviously you didn't adhere to the first warning. So then we may give you the actual $100 citation that comes with having your dog off the leash. But really what we want is people to comply.
Thank you.
So police assist would be any type of call directly from the police department that could be a drunk driver has a dog in his vehicle and they're arresting the drunk driver. So they would like us to pick up the dog. It could be they see a dog at large and they're trying to get it. So they call us in for help. But more than likely it's an arrest with an animal with them. There has been several situations where police assist involves a death in the home and there's an animal in the home and we need to remove the dog due to their investigation or cat in some circumstances.
So Mark,
at large
I've been
stray,
thinking,
I think we covered.
So also we're going to need a new data point because we have a new program coming into Petaluma to help our police department and that's Cahoots. So we'll have a new data point and I do expect, we want to be a part of that. We definitely want to assist when there are animals involved in those kinds of interactions. And so we will have to, we definitely are going to think about how that's going to look like. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I don't know if everybody's familiar with that, but basically a lot of times officers have interactions where you walk away from the person that you interacted with some concerns, whether their well-being, how they're keeping up on their health or their mental status. And a lot of times we're really torn on how is the best way to proceed that's going to get the best solution for this person. And yes, we can help with the animal portion of it, but there has been this great, turmoil for officers for how to help the person. So if Cahoots could really move that ball forward, we really are going to be excited for that because we definitely come across quite a few that we would like to get service to. So that just kind of covers that. Let's see. Transport just basically if we just have to take an animal from one place to another. If another vet needs an animal moved from one location to another and a officer has to be involved, they just log it as, hey, I had to go move A to B or pick up a donation or pick up supplies or whatever it is, they log that as a transport. We do get a lot of welfare checks. People want us to check on, it may start as a barking complaint, but they feel more serious about it. So it turns into a welfare check because maybe the dog sounds in distress. So we'll log that as a welfare check as opposed to just a barking complaint. So the officer will respond appropriately. But we get a lot of those that may turn out to be nothing and may just turn out to, they didn't know that their dog was, needed to be checked on. And then wildlife, we've had a lot of wildlife calls and one of the things that is so nice to have such a great working relationship with bird rescue and wildlife rescue. We pick up anything and it's easy to go to the call because you have a great place to turn it over to and say, hey, I picked up this injured skunk that most people would run from, but really he just has a trap stuck on his paw. And a lot of them get that mouse trap stuck on their paw and they need a place to go to just get that relief and then be released back to their home. So we get a lot of wildlife calls because we know we can get them to these great places that can help them out. I think that's it for me, Sue.
My apologies for interrupting real quick. I think Brian Cochran wanted to comment on Cahoots.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Thanks, Mark. For members of the commission and members of the community who may not know what Cahoots is, it's a new program that the city is starting up this summer. City Council recently approved it, which is a mobile crisis intervention program. So it'll be staffed by 2 individuals, an EMT, emergency medical technician, along with a mental health outreach worker. And so they will be responding to all types of calls throughout Petaluma, whether it's a somebody experiencing homelessness, mental health crisis, drug or alcohol problems and in the community, and they can actually respond to a good percentage of the calls that often are responded to by a police officer or firefighter. So it's additional resource within the community. And I think what Mark was referring to is, you know, there may be probably two different situations. Either, like he was alluding to, a animal control officer be concerned for the person's welfare once they arrive, or cahoots, on the other hand, cahoots may actually respond to somebody in crisis if there happens to be an animal in that situation, so may need help from NBAS. So we're really excited about it, and I know NBAS is as well. We think it'll really be a big help to folks in the community who are experiencing all types of crises.
Okay, any other questions about the calls for service, which I think we should rename anytime an officer leaves the building? I think that makes more sense.
Mark just didn't go over the at-large stray row.
Oh, I thought we had talked, sorry. The at-large stray is a call comes in, you see an animal. And an officer gets a case put in for a response. They may go out there and the animal's gone, or it's already returned home. But that's from the public calling it in, specifically that they've seen an animal, they kind of have an idea of the description and a direction of travel. They've called it in and an officer responds. Doesn't mean that they picked one up. Doesn't mean that the officer found it. Sometimes it could be an animal in front of its driveway, and when you get there, the owner comes walking out, and so there's not an intake done. There's not an outcome because the owner says, "Hey, I got my dog. Sorry about that. I'll make sure I put it on a leash." You say, "Have a good day," and you move on. But there's not something to be enforcement on. Just kind of good stewardship of your animal. So at large really is calls from the public. But sometimes it doesn't always mean there's going to be an actual intake of the animal.
Got it. And do you check Nextdoor? Because I often see things pop up that said, you know, does anyone know this cat or this chicken?
So Nextdoor, Facebook, we have had so many different avenues of information coming to us. Josie's Lost Dog, and now we have other cities. So we get all these different stray calls for service that don't necessarily come through our phone bank. And we've had our Facebook person basically 24/7, and she's probably listening right now. She's constantly monitoring Nextdoor and Facebook to see if anybody's reporting anything that she then would report to the shelter to put it in for a call for service. But yeah, we do monitor those quite a bit. There people are right on it, and they send a picture and description, and it's great.
Mark, does that large stray include like a DOA call, a deceased animal call, like a cat that was hit by a car or something like that?
Sometimes it does. Sometimes people say there's a injured animal and we get there and there is one and it's passed away by the time we've gotten there. So then, it turns into a different outcome or the officer's intake of it. But it originally started as a stray animal that then later was found deceased. We've had several dogs, as you guys have seen in the Facebook and Nextdoor, where they've been out running around for 4 or 5 days. And so we will get multiple calls on the same animal. And then later you'll find, the cat deceased or dog or whatever it is. But it's just, you never know which way it's going to turn. But yeah, those calls come from every angle possible.
So Mark, is it true that traditionally domestic animals, if it was DOA, would be logged under at-large stray, but wildlife DOA would be logged under wildlife?
That's correct. If it's a duck or something got hit, it should be a wildlife DOA. And a lot of times we'll get reports for a deceased, like we've had several otters hit out here over by Lakeville, and it'll get reported as a, hit by car cat or hit by car dog. And we get there and it's an otter. It's just the randomest things happen sometimes. But yes, they get reported as wildlife DOA.
Other questions as you're looking at the calls for service categories or numbers?
I'm just curious, the public spay neuter numbers, you haven't really talked about those yet. And I'm just,
I was just gonna, thank you for the segue. So on the right side of the screen, you'll see that we have our public spay neuter numbers here. In 2020, we shut down our spay neuter clinics, as everybody else did in the area, because of for reasons of COVID. Spay neuter clinics are always, and we're no exception, held in very tight quarters. There's not an opportunity to social distance in any way. You've got, I'm sure Jessica, you've been involved in those before. You have volunteers that are stationed in different parts of the clinic, the parts of the operation, in order to handle the animal at different points in their spay or their neuter. So we did evaluate like how could we possibly run a spay neuter clinic in our shelter, even though we were under, how could we socially distance? How could we make it work? And it was not feasible to do. Yet we knew that there was a need out there in the public to continue to provide some sort of spay and neuter for their pets. So we were able to leverage our relationship with our primary vet, and we were able to provide those services on an as needed basis for a lower number of the public than we'd like to. But we were able to continue to provide those services, just not in that traditional spay neuter clinic setting. And Mark, can you comment on backlog or waiting list that we have right now? Were we able to meet that need in 2020?
So I think if you were to call around to just any place else, any shelter that's about our size or any other, I don't know anybody at this matter, most places are 2 to 3 months behind schedule. I think right now we have about 26 dogs on the waiting list and about 16 cats. So we've been able to keep up between our animals going to the vet and a public animal going to the vet, as opposed to just doing one clinic of say 12 dogs or 12 cats at one time. We've been able to just bring them in on a daily basis, except for Sunday and Saturday and Sunday. We've been able to just be able to filter them through that way. So we've been able to keep up pretty good. So that doesn't take too long to get through that list. And by the time we get to you, some people have already went somewhere else, or they get on multiple lists to try to get through faster. So you can get on our list as long as you're a resident of the city. We're happy to help. We've even done a few outside just because their animal was going to go in the heat and they really wanted to try to get that done. So we've helped where we could, but definitely you can get on the list and get done pretty quick, actually.
And I think you bring up another good point in that there are a number of organizations in our county now who provide spay neuter services. So it's pretty common for an individual to get on multiple waiting lists and then take the first slot that's available, which is something new, relatively new in the last 3 years. We've seen a resurgence of spay neuter services for the public. I should say low cost spay neuter services. Other questions? Okay, I'm going to move on. So I pulled together the numbers from 2019 to compare them to the numbers that we saw in 2020. And we've got some interesting things to look at here. First, remember that we're an open admission shelter. We talked a little bit about this last time, but to refresh everyone's memory, this means that any animal that comes across our threshold, we will provide services for. We don't get to pick and choose. We don't get to turn anybody away, and we wouldn't have it any other way. The only number on this chart, we're looking at intakes now, that we have any control over are the transfers, right? These are the ones that we bring into our care when we have the resources to accommodate them. And to some degree, we can control intake clinics and intake services, but we'll microchip anybody that any animal that wants to be microchipped. We're not gonna scrimp on that for sure. What do we notice about these numbers? So overall, intakes were down in 2020. Part of that is because we think that people were home more with their pets. There were less strays. Owner surrenders are down a little bit, not really that significantly. Again, I think this cuts both ways. People were home with their pets and they were happy with them, or they were home with their pets and they decided maybe this isn't the right pet for me. I need some help from the shelter. We transferred in fewer animals, and part of this was a conscious decision on our part, especially early on in COVID, because we didn't know what was going to happen. We had no idea if we were going to have an influx of animals that would require our services. But we continued to keep that number relatively low because our shelter partners were enjoying this increase in adoptions and fostering themselves. And there was less need from our partner shelters for us to help them out with space. So in 2020, we saw a huge shift in the animal welfare world across the nation. Many people stepped up to foster pets and to empty shelters that were traditionally overcrowded. It's just really an amazing thing that has happened. And what's grown out of that is some new models for those shelters that were so desperately in need before. And the hope is that those fosters and those increased adoptions will remain for those shelters. The real number that is so interesting here is our intake wildlife. I think we've said this a couple times tonight, but it doubled. The number of wildlife that we physically handled doubled in 2020. Again, people were home and noticing wildlife in the area, and the wildlife, things were quiet. And so all kinds of wildlife were encroaching in areas that they probably hadn't been before. Slight increase in our clinic and services numbers here, not significant. But as it was hard to get vet appointments, people were asking us a little bit more if we could help out to get their animals in to see a vet, and we accommodated when we could. Not only were the vets closed initially for an initial period during COVID, but once they reopened, they were definitely playing catch up. And then the numbers of adoptions that happened during COVID really increased their new patient numbers as well. So that's, I think we're still seeing, not we at the shelter, but we as individuals are still seeing the fallout from that. It's still pretty hard to get a vet appointment. We're fortunate to have a great relationship with our vet, and so the services that they provide us didn't change in any way. Okay, any questions on the intake numbers before we look at outcomes? Take a look at our outcome adoptions. Adoptions were down in 2020, but intakes were down also. So overall, we did not miss a beat in terms of making sure that our animals got out of the shelter through the adoption process. The staff is adept now at introducing you via video conference to your next new best friend, whether it's cat, dog, or iguana. So everybody listening, be sure and check the website, northbayanimalservices.org. check out the pets, submit an application, and get yourself an appointment. To me, return to owners was a little bit surprising on the dog number. I thought it would have been a little bit easier to get dogs returned to their owner because everybody was home. But, you know, perhaps folks were home and may not have wanted their animal returned. Maybe they decided, this escape artist, I've had enough of this. I'm going to ask the shelter for help here. And when you look at the overall numbers here, when you look at the number of euthanasias, euthanasias are rare in our shelter. Okay, one number that I did not put on this slide, but it does exist on the infographic that you also have, is the live release rate. As a reminder, live release rate is a ratio between the number of outcomes and the number of live outcomes. So a shelter that enjoys a greater than 90% live release rate or save rate is considered a no-kill shelter, and ours was at 99% last year. Any questions about the outcome comparisons? All right, now we're looking at our calls for service. Again, I'm going to highlight wildlife calls. Huge increase. Strays, barking complaints, those all increased. Again, people were home and noticing things that they probably weren't noticing before. But to Mark's point about the bark complaints went down in 2020. Part of that is people were home and they had their animals they heard the barking and they stopped the barking. But also I think it does highlight that it's when our officers get a bark complaint, the first recommendation is to have a neighbor to neighbor conversation. So go talk to your neighbor and try and work it out. And if that doesn't work, then yeah, we'll get involved and we will help you give you the forms to log those bark incidents and the durations of those barks, and then we can take it, we can take it from there. Questions? It's a lot of numbers. We're looking at a lot of numbers. So what does all this tell us? What can we take away from all of these numbers? While we can plan for and schedule our care services for an animal once it's in our care, the numbers that we've been looking at tonight are not predictive. If, for example, 1 month your intake numbers are high, it does not predict that the next month they're going to continue to be high. Or if they're high in one area, they're not going to be high in that same area the next month. Likewise, we don't have a time limit for the animals in our care. So one thing that you don't see in our numbers is length of stay. And that is sometimes a metric that is tracked by other shelters. We don't think that this is an important metric because we don't put a time limit on our animals. We prefer to place that pet in the correct home after we do the necessary assessments and provide any kind of supportive or behavior care that is possible in our shelter. When you think about all those wildlife calls that we were talking about, those are handled by our animal control officers. And that meant that they were out of the physical building a majority of their time. The staff pitched in to help out with some of the duties that they normally have when they spend time in the office. So, examples of those are helping process licenses, working on big shelter projects. We're always improving the physical shelter, whether it's laying grass for the dogs or painting a cat room, or, you know, there's always something to be done. But the way that we pitched in, the staff pitched in to cover for animal control officers going off on other calls was pretty amazing. Another thing that I do want to alert everybody to is that there's a big change coming to animal welfare in the way that data is collected. So the live release rate and the Asilomar status is becoming less common in shelter data. It was originally intended to hold shelters accountable for unnecessary killing of healthy pets, but there are too many loopholes that a dishonest shelter could take advantage of to manipulate that number. So basically, that live release rate and the Asilomar status is a metric that relies on a qualitative assessment of the animal's general well-being at intake and at outcome. If that data point is missing from the animal's record, that animal will not be included in the live release rate calculation. So you can see just in that one example that it would be pretty easy to game the system. What's coming is shelter animals count. It's a new metric. It's actually been released in its 2.0 version. And the advantage of this methodology is that it eliminates that subjective assessment of the pet upon intake and upon outcome. And it looks at that raw intake data and raw outcome data to then be assessed as you want. The disadvantage is that there's not this nice clean overall metric called live release rate. It requires that you look a little more holistically and you don't rely on this number that has really become a touch point in the animal welfare world. So our PetPoint software has the ability to track both metrics, and we're assessing how shelter animals count will be of value to us as we move forward. But we will continue to report on live release rate, and we'll use the Asilomar status as much as possible. And any change we'll definitely keep you guys all in the loop about. But it's not a change just that we're deciding to make. This is an animal welfare movement shift from Asilomar into a more holistic shelter animals count metric.
So Sue, I have a question about that. When I look at the Asilomar animal statistics that are on the website for the 2020, how do I reconcile those with the data that you've just shown us?
You can't. Asilomar, I'll tell you, Asilomar does not, it only tracks dogs and cats. It only tracks animals that are older than 8 weeks old. It only includes animals that have 4 data points. One is the Asilomar status at intake. The other is the Asilomar status at outcome. The other is the Asilomar category that a data category in PetPoint is attributed to, both on intake and on outcome. So in the past 4 months, I've undertaken a huge cleanup project with the 2020 data. And I've gone back and tracked the Asilomar status. I've tracked the Asilomar data points that are included by category. I've looked at intake types, intake subtypes, and made sure that the data is clean. And then I generated all of the various Asilomar reports out of PetPoint and discovered that there's a major bug. So I've reported that bug to PetPoint, and they're doing some investigation to figure out to resolve that issue. This was one of the jobs that I did when I worked for PetPoint, because I'd get this question all the time from my clients. They would say, how do I reconcile my Asilomar numbers with the numbers that I'm seeing in my database? And we would go record by record and understand, okay, this kitten is not a part of your Asilomar data because this kitten at intake was younger than 8 weeks old. Or this dog is eliminated from your Asilomar data because you forgot to include an intake Asilomar status. Or this animal is not included in your Asilomar data because you didn't map intake clinic for microchip in your Asilomar categories, which you wouldn't, because that's not really an intake. It's not an animal in your care. It's an owned animal, a publicly owned animal. So going through the data line by line, animal by animal, was the only way to reconcile those numbers. And what I discovered, so I did some calculations on my own, disregarding the Asilomar eliminations, basically. And my own calculated live release rate based on the data that you're looking at tonight was 96%. So that included many animals that the official Asilomar Accords and official Asilomar data would have eliminated.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Okay, next I want to turn to the budget that we have. I have that on a different slide here. So this is the budget for 2020. You can see that we've got a column for the yearly total, and then we broke it out into monthly average, and then the original target information by month. And then if you look at, we've got an income breakdown and an expense breakdown, and then an overall balance sheet at the bottom. So a couple things to point out. One is that, so actually let's back all the way up. These numbers are only pertain to the work that we do in Petaluma. And so looking at our yearly total of the income we enjoy from the city contract in Petaluma versus the amount of income that we enjoy from our incredibly generous donors, the city contract covers about 60% of the services that we provide to the city of Petaluma. We're very grateful to our donors. Without our donors, we would not be able to provide the kind of services that we want to and that the city of Petaluma definitely deserves.
Hey, Sue, sorry, real quick.
Go ahead.
Just real quick. You mentioned this represents the financials for your work within the city of Petaluma. Can you just briefly explain where else you folks have contracts with and where else you work?
Sure. We also have a contract with the town of Windsor, with Cloverdale, and with Calistoga.
Thank you.
And then we have a partial contract with this, Healdsburg. We provide animal control services in Healdsburg. Okay, another thing to point out is that since animal services in Petaluma has been provided by nonprofits, that is the year 2012, this base number has not changed. The only thing that's changed is that twice there have been some elimination of the licensing fees that we return back to the city. I hope that makes sense. So with this latest contract renewal, we've We don't return any of the licensing money to the city. So in effect, that was our increase. But I think it's important to note that for the next 5 years, the city of Petaluma will enjoy a flat rate fee. It's not going to go up. That budget line item will remain at $478,200. For us, we know that the services that we provide, the cost of service is going to increase for sure. Everything goes up. And the kinds of services that we provide is definitely going to increase as well. We talked a little bit about Cahoots. That's a new agency that we'll be responding to calls from. So that is definitely new service that we'll be providing. So it's important, I think, for everybody to be aware of that donations are a big source of revenue for us, as are other revenue generating opportunities.
So it's still I have a question. So I often think that when you're looking at something in arrears, it's not a budget. And I had a question about your budget for 2021. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, we can take a look at doing that.
Great.
Another thing that's not reflected on this budget or how we spent your money sheet is that the city of Petaluma benefits from resources that the organization provides or has expended money toward. An example of that is the equipment. So we purchased 2 disaster relief trailers, and these we'll use as we are providing mutual aid for any, whoever calls and whoever needs us. In the event that Petaluma is one of those places, that's not something that's covered by the contract. But it's definitely a service that we would provide to Petaluma. So I think that's also important to note that some of the things that the city of Petaluma enjoys in terms of services or equipment aren't covered under the contract. And likewise with staffing. So as we have taken on a couple of other contracts, we've been able to increase the level of staffing at North Bay Animal Services. This helps everybody. So it definitely benefits Petaluma that we now have four front desk staff people and license processors. It's just the economy of scale that we're able to provide better customer service because we have better coverage of the phones and eventually of the front doors opening than we would if we had just had the 1.5 FTE.
Which is full-time equivalent.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions around these numbers? No, okay. All right, so let's just finish up with a glimpse into the future. We're not going back to normal. What we learned from 2020 is that we can respond to challenges with creativity and do it quickly. We closed the doors overnight, changed our service model several times throughout the year, all without sacrificing quality of care for both pets and our community. While we've always embraced outreach and getting out into the community, we recognize that the future of our organization and the services we provide to the Petaluma community do not need to happen within our 4 walls. Exactly the contrary. When people can't come to us, we go to them with services that we need. And while we can't wait to get back out there and go to the fair and be involved in the Butter and Egg Days parade, we know that the services that we've provided as everyone has been sheltering in place will continue. Animal services in our area, Sonoma County and beyond, goes through periods of cooperation and isolation. In our county, each city provides sheltering and field services in a different way, under a different model. And then we have many, many rescue groups who supplement with care and adoptable pets. In addition, in the last couple of years, we've seen the emergence of disaster relief groups that are activated when needed. So I can't tell you how happy and excited I am to say that right now, in this moment in time, we've never experienced a more cooperative period between animal welfare organizations within our county and beyond our county. Mark's been instrumental in leading that charge through quiet, competent example and his ability to anticipate the needs of the animal loving community. So bottom line is that 2020 made us stronger, and we're looking forward to building on that experience to continue our services to the Petaluma community. And that's what I have for you tonight. Does the committee have questions?
Well, I think let's actually open up public comment first, and then we can circle back to any further questions. So, Sue, thank you for the very in-depth presentation, and Mark. So let's open up public comment, Aaron, please, and then we'll bring it back to the committee.
Thank you. Those wishing to participate in public comment must raise their virtual hand and wait to be called on by the moderator. Speakers are reminded to be respectful in their comments. Threats of violence and obscenity are grounds for removal from this meeting. A countdown will appear for the convenience of the speaker and viewers. Your microphone will be muted at the end of that countdown. The first speaker will be acknowledged, invited to speak when the countdown begins. Please make sure to unmute yourself when you're invited to do so. The first speaker that we have is Susan Kirks. I will now allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and begin.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm so glad that I attended your meeting tonight. And Sue, thank you for that really wonderful snapshot of what this last year has been about for North Bay Animal Services during the pandemic. I wanted to highlight the incredible increase in number of calls that you had related to wildlife. And I can understand that because as a naturalist here in the community, a lot of my outreach related to American badger is to facilitate a higher level of understanding and comfort about the true nature of the mammal, the American badger, and to help dispel myths and calm fears, and often lead to a real awakening in terms of how we coexist with so much wildlife in our area. So I just can't imagine some of the calls that you all likely responded to. Sometimes there's just a lot of fear in our community because people aren't familiar with certain species. And I just was reading something on Nextdoor last evening about someone who was just terrified because a possum had been walking across their fence. And it just always helps to just provide information and support to members of our community to help us understand that we have a lot of wildlife here. And, you know, the wildlife generally is not out to get us. So I just want to say thank you to North Bay Animal Services for your adaptation and the really complex, multi-layered services you provide to our Petaluma community. I just am deeply grateful to you and to Mark Scott for his leadership and his compassion. He's certainly been compassionate in communication with me and your officers with whom I've interacted and staff and your volunteers. So that's my comment, and thank you very much. Oh, and best wishes with your budget into 2021.
Thank you. And just a reminder to the speakers, the public comment is on the annual report that was just presented, as well as the budget. The next speaker that we have is Amy Taylor. I'll now allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and begin.
Hi, I have a question. I noticed, because it's public record, that the North Bay Animal Shelter has received a PPP government loan, and on that loan, it says $17,000 a month for rent. And as Sue Davy just showed us, you pay $1 a month. So I'm just curious as to why would you put $17,000 on a government grant when you don't pay that? Can I get an answer to that?
Sorry, Amy, at this point it's public comment. You can ask the question and staff can respond later on in this process, but it's not a back and forth type of question answering.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead and email the city and see if they respond. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker they have is Sale. I'll now allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and begin.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, that was all really interesting. And I do have to agree that that's really confusing, because I also saw that there was a a loan slash bailout that was requested. And I don't see that on the budget at all. It looks like it was about a $93,000 or more loan, and part of it was for income, part of it was for salary, and part of it was for rent. And both of those things look like they were fully covered by the city of Petaluma. So I'm confused about why that didn't show up on the income. And secondly, yeah, thank you, Sue Davy, very much for letting us know why you apparently changed a lot of records in the database, because I guess I don't exactly understand why, but I guess that's a little bit of an explanation. And so thank you very much for that. And thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker that we have is Mark Kimberly, and I'll allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and begin.
Yeah, hi, and thank you. So I've been here all night through the whole meeting, and you know, in the very beginning of this meeting, I raised some very, very serious questions about some very serious issues with NBAS.
Mr. Kimberly, I hate to interrupt you, but you need to, as Aaron described, you need to make your comments, please, to this specific agenda item.
To which agenda? What are you talking about now?
Mr. Kimberly, the public comment right now is specifically on the annual report and the budget. So your comments need to be on task with this item. So if you have comments regarding the annual report and the budget summary, you can continue. Acting Chair Alonso, it looks like we do not have any other hands raised.
Okay, thank you, Aaron, and bringing it back to the committee and staff. I guess first off, does city staff want to respond first to the question about the PPE loan?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Brian Cochran, Assistant City Manager. I can briefly respond, although I think NBAS would need to dive into any of the details that they wanted to discuss. But generally, I would observe that a loan is not, typically considered revenue. I don't believe on the books. I am not a CPA, so full disclosure on that. But typically, the loan would be a liability, would not be credited in as income. That was my kind of first off the top of my head thought when the question was asked, but I would ask Sue or Mark if they have any further comment on that.
Okay, thank you. Does Mark or Sue, can you weigh in on that, please?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
The PPP loan was definitely something we knew we were going to need right off the bat with the COVID dip. We went ahead and applied for it according to what our advisors told us we should do. As far as how things should be categorized, one of the hopeful things that are come out of this audit will how we best categorize things in the future. And we do lease other buildings as well. So it's not just, I know this building is not leased or $1 a year, but we do have other stores that we rent. So I don't know if that helps you understand it. I'd rather get something more in writings that we can submit so it'd be a little more clear.
Okay. Yeah, I think maybe when we discuss the audit, when the audit results come back, maybe that can be an item as well for us to get an update on. I think that makes sense given the audit results are still pending and we can discuss it at the next agenda item as appropriate. Any other comments or questions from committee members before we move on? Councilmember Fisher?
Well, I was going to ask more about the PPP loan and whether, and was that correct? It was $93,000 and it was for your organization for all your contracts, not necessarily just for Petaluma. Is that why the rent number in there? And that was received in 2020?
Oh, sorry, I'm muted. Yes, that was for 2020 and it is for the entire organization.
And it was 93,000?
I think 93,500, something like that. I'd have to, don't quote me on it because I have to look up the number to be exact.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark, for that additional information. Any other comments or questions? Seeing no other hands go up, we will move on to the next agenda item, which is a quarterly report for the first quarter of 2021 from January to the end of March. And we will have a update from NBAS staff.
So in keeping with the conversation that we've had thus far tonight, you have the quarterly statistics in your packet. It was part of the agenda, intakes, outcomes, and calls for service. We can take a look at those numbers and I can talk through those numbers. I'm pretty sure you're tired of hearing my voice at this point. Do you have any questions around those numbers?
Any questions for NBAS on the quarterly statistics? Councilmember Fisher?
No, I'm just wondering if Sue can share her screen and show us those and just walk through it real quickly, just as a snapshot of the first quarter.
Yeah, hold on one second.
And actually, Sue, if I could just chime in for a second, just to put a little context on the quarterly report. So I think Sue mentioned it at the outset of her last presentation, but the contract does ask for a mid-year report as well as an annual report. But as we talked about, I think at the January meeting, NBAS has a good dashboard system that allows them to do monthly reports. And I think the plan is to put those up on the NBAS website every month. So we thought, given that the commission is meeting quarterly, that it would be a convenient update report to do a quarterly report that would consist of the prior or the most recent 3 months, so that we're getting continuous reporting from NBAS and the commission can ask questions more in real time as opposed to looking at something that's just data from, say, a year ago. So that was kind of the thought of doing this quarterly report each meeting.
And Brian, it's Delinda. I have a question. Are we expecting a financial snapshot on quarterly reports?
I don't think so, but I would defer to NBAS if that's something that they can put together as well. I think this data is coming out of their services system, but Sue, correct me.
Yeah, we can look into providing quarterly data on financials as well. It's understandable that you want to see those numbers, but we need to think about, and you're going to need to guide us about what you're looking for in those numbers, and then we can respond with how we can satisfy that need. We definitely, are going above and beyond in terms of the services that we're providing to Petaluma, and we want to make sure that we reflect that in any data, any financials that we give you. But we're also cognizant of the resources that it requires to maintain, not to maintain the data, because we maintain the data, but to continue to revise reports and send them to you. I don't want to leave you with the impression that we don't want to do that, but I also do want to leave you with the impression that this does take resources from us.
Well, I guess if you're using QuickBooks, am I going to assume you are? That's a question.
Yes.
Yeah. So quarterly reporting in QuickBooks, even monthly reporting is just a click of the button, as long as you've got all your things categorized correctly, which hopefully this audit is creating for you. But my reason for asking for it is, and for a yearly budget at the beginning of the year is really to help guide us as to whether or not you're staying on track. Do we have the donations coming in that you need to cover the services? Where might the gaps be? Where can we, lower expenses? The other departments in the city were asking to start tracking the fossil fuel consumption. So things like that.
That's actually super helpful because we are going to see gaps. And we know that when there is an economic dip, that nonprofits see that not that year, not the next year, but 2 years following. And so we know in this last year that we did enjoy some lovely donations, and for which we are very grateful. But this is something that is on our mind daily about how do we keep those donation numbers up, and how do we supplement with some other creative revenue generating scenarios. So when the Animal Services Advisory Committee was first conceived and formed, it was a fundraising arm for the city of Petaluma's animal services. We're not suggesting that this group do that. We definitely, wouldn't expect that of you, but we would love to work in partnership a little more closely with the Animal Services Advisory Committee, as we are with, for example, the city attorney's office in helping us respond to records requests and making sure that personal information, for example, isn't shared erroneously. So we welcome further and closer connection with the Animal Services Advisory Committee in any way that you could provide it.
And Sue, this is Brian. Maybe just one other observation, because what I think is happening with your books is you guys have an organization, and there are some resources that benefit your multiple different entities. So when you're reporting on, for example, your Petaluma-centric financials, I'm going to assume that there's some manual work that goes into pulling the data and kind of stripping it down to just the Petaluma specific thing. So that's where I'm just wondering if maybe the quarterly financials with that manual, process to get it to Petaluma may be a bit of work. Is that accurate, or?
It is. I mean, we definitely have percentage of costs, percentage of staffing, that would take us some work to put in place. Once that's in place, it will probably be easier. So I can't make a promise for the next meeting, but it's definitely something that we will evaluate.
Yeah, and you could just create an Excel spreadsheet that would probably take
Yeah,
pretty quickly.
I know. We could just do that. It's funny, in my other life, there's lots of it's pretty simple to do X, Y, and Z. And I appreciate the request, and we will definitely take a look at that.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions?
Well, she hasn't gone through this yet, so that was my request.
Okay. Is there
So
anything?
we've got the same numbers, the same categories. It's in infographic form here, so you can see cats and dogs and other intakes, outcomes, live release rate, calls for service, vet services. We closed our doors to volunteers, so we do not have volunteer hours.
Okay, great. Any specific questions or comments based on the infographic?
Yeah, I have a question. So the intakes 98 and 35, so say 130, and the outcomes seem to be a much greater number.
Yep, because we've got that carryover number from the previous year. So at the end of 2020, our shelter wasn't empty. We still had animals in our care. So for the first quarter of 2021, our outcomes could easily outpace our intakes.
So this infographic doesn't work for me then. Because we somehow need to make those numbers show up here, right? So maybe it's another one that says, you know, what you had at the beginning, you know, who you had in your possession, in your care, and then additional intakes and then outcomes. Because otherwise we're not accounting for that number at all, and it doesn't show up here.
Sue or Mark, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. Yes, we can revise. You know, I think that's what this is for, is to figure out what information that you need from us so that we can provide it in a way that is meaningful to you.
Well, and for the community as well, right? So we know, yeah, what's happening.
I think in previous meetings, it was suggested that we come up with a kind of a graphic that would explain what we're doing rather than just raw data in Excel sheets or just printed out of our system. So that's what this infographic was supposed to reach the person who's got experience and the person that had limited experience in sheltering. So that way we can kind of cross-explain to everybody what's going on. So I think the graphic is nice, and that's why we put it there. But I think originally it was suggested by you guys to actually come up with something like this. And we're happy to add to it if you want something other than, or change to it, or research some of the other shelters. We're happy to add to it. But I thought originally this was to actually make it easier to understand.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good graphic. It's just for my brain processing, I need that number to say, you know, who was in the shelter when this graphic started, so I can make up the intakes and the out. So I don't look at it and go, oh my God, how come all these outcomes and you didn't, you know, so few intakes?
You know,
I know 1 and 1 should always equal 2, and when you're sheltering, there are so many variables of how a dog comes in or a cat comes in and how they go back out. Having that very simple, here's how it's going to end result be, is more complicated than just a simple graphic that you're referring to. But we're happy to try anything that's going to further this along.
I think too, Councilmember Fisher, if you look at intakes, we've got 2 categories, and when we were looking at the raw data, we had other categories like transfers. So this infographic, yeah, is not going to add up the way that the previous line by line Excel spreadsheets did.
So this isn't, yeah, you're right. So this is not telling me how many you transferred in either.
Correct.
Okay, so for a quarterly report, I don't know that this is working, and maybe it's nice to have this graphic to put up on the website, but maybe we as a committee need those Excel spreadsheets. I don't know. It's somewhere where we need to see the numbers, and they're not here, so I'm not sure how to provide that. But that's what's being requested.
So we can certainly provide this for like our website for the public. And then for the committee quarterly reports, we can certainly provide a more detailed spreadsheet for you, if that really will help you out.
Well, it's actually to meet the terms of your contract, right?
In the contract, we are obligated to provide an annual report and a mid-year report.
Correct.
So yeah, so perhaps we don't even need this quarterly. We just do it mid-year and annual.
Well, I think, Councilmember, we had discussed at the January meeting that there was a desire to have more data on a regular basis. Hence why they created this quarterly report when they didn't have to. But if folks don't find it valuable, we can just wait for the mid-year. Brian, did you want to?
This is Brian. Yeah, I'll just chime in that I agree with that last comment that this was an attempt to go above and beyond. And Mark, I believe in preview that they were, in January, they were working on this sort of dashboard infographic style that would allow them to report really over any time period that we wanted. And so the monthly was their proposal to put them up on the web, et cetera. And since we're meeting every 3 months, it felt pretty easy and kind of a clean way to look at a quarterly snapshot, just as a additional extra reporting tool to the commission. But yes, we could definitely go back to just mid-year and annual if that's easier, and if it provides a more complete picture, that's easier to understand.
Okay, sounds good. Any other comments before we open up to public comment?
I wanted to, I had a question about the volunteer hours. I was surprised to hear through this meeting that you guys have completely shut your doors to volunteers. I'm not surprised that you had to, but just imagining the impact on the shelter, having come from a shelter environment and knowing really that volunteers often do the bulk of a lot of the hands-on work in a shelter environment. How are you guys meeting that need without having those people there to help you anymore?
So I think I'll jump in, Sue. So without having volunteers has been the biggest challenge for us, of course. They did so much, rather just bringing in a smile or helping with laundry or walking a dog has obviously been missed tremendously. And one of the things the staff has had to change from giving maybe so much personal attention to people and public that was coming into the building. Now that we don't have public coming into the building, the staff has more time to just focus on the animals or the task at hand. So we've been able to switch a little bit or transition a little bit to just taking care of what is actually desperately needed that day, or laundry or walking a dog or changing beds or what have you for some of the animals. So it's been a transition. It's been tough. We even were able to do it through the pandemic and the fires, but the volunteers is one of those things you just can't put a weight on how much they mean to us.
Thank you. All right, we will open general or public comments specifically on this agenda item on the quarterly report from January to March of 2021. and then we'll bring it back to the committee for any further discussion.
Thank you. Those wishing to participate in public comment must raise their virtual hand and wait to be called on by the moderator. Speakers are reminded to be respectful in their comments. Threats of violence and obscenity are grounds for removal from this meeting. A countdown will appear for the convenience of the speaker and viewers. Your microphone will be muted at the end of that countdown. The first speaker will be acknowledged and invited to speak when the countdown begins. Please make sure to unmute yourself when you're invited to do so. And public comment specifically is for the quarterly report for the first quarter. The first speaker that we have is Sale. I'll allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and begin.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm really concerned and curious about this dashboard and about the nature of these quarterly reports, not so much the frequency, but the nature of them, which is that when I requested public data, I received a spreadsheet. I received several spreadsheets, which were the case data and the animal intake data, and I was able to form my own conclusions from this data. It wasn't, I hate to say this, but it wasn't dumbed down. It wasn't graphical. It was actually the data that you guys use to record and track the animals that you take in and the animals that you provide services for. And that's actually the nature of your business, is to track and record and keep tabs on these animals. These are actual live animals and sometimes dead animals and sometimes cremated animals that you take in and provide services for. And seeing the actual raw data is really beneficial, not just to the public and not just to you internally, but to the city, because this is important information. It's important for us to understand how you use this data and how you share this data. And what I'm seeing in your dashboard does not at all match what I saw in your raw data that's entered into the very, very good software PetPoint. My request as a citizen is that the city requests access to the PetPoint software to the degree that they can see what has been changed and when and by whom, because your numbers are not adding up. And thank you so much for providing the dashboard data, because it helps us understand what the gap is between your record keeping and your reporting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker that we have is Amy Taylor. I'll now allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and begin.
Kind of piggybacking off a Sale, Petaluma Animal Services Foundation. Hello?
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Petaluma Animal Services Foundation would just go in and print a report off of PetPoint. So I'm wondering why North Bay Animal Services continually gets away with the fact that they can just make their own spreadsheet. And I just want to make sure we can get a raw data straight from the software. We haven't yet to see that, even though we're promised at every meeting we're going to get it. How do we know the numbers aren't being skewed when they're on a picture with graphics? I can do that at home. So it's pretty frustrating that the city is allowing North Bay Animal Services to get away with not using the PetPoint. Like, why do you have it if you're not going to print reports off of it? And you're going to make up your own reports and your own numbers that absolutely do not add up. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Acting Chair Alonso, at this point, there are no more hands raised.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. We will close public comment for this agenda item, bring it back to the committee. Any further comment or questions? Councilmember Fisher.
Yeah, just real quick. Given the comments that we're hearing from the public, there seems to be this element of distrust that's happening. And I'm wanting to know how we come together and remove that, because it feels divisive and it doesn't yeah. So any thoughts from staff?
I'll jump in, Sue. We would love for you guys to come down and visit. And I think if we could have those sit downs with you as they go between public and us, we've offered to several of you to come on down and visit and just really see what it takes to do this. and maybe get a different take on it. And so when you get these public comments, that you can speak to it from a hands-on experience in a sense, or just eyes-on experience. So I think that would be a big help for the public to feel like you're connected to us in a sense, that you see what we see. That's just my suggestion.
Well, I love data. So if you want to have me access to the data, I'd love that too.
Unfortunately, because of privacy issues, we can't allow it. I'm sorry.
Okay. But you can run reports from it, right?
And we do. And that's how you get the spreadsheet. I feel like there is a lot of misunderstanding and misinterpretation by the public. And so we have made every attempt to reach out to individuals and to reach out to groups of people, and we have our doors open. We respond to emails and with great detail and much data. And Councilmember Fisher, when people don't like the answer that they hear, it doesn't satisfy them. So we are open, we are transparent, we welcome everyone to ask us questions. We have on numerous occasions invited people down to the shelter, opening our doors to have a conversation. We are here at these meetings, and we're not supposed to answer to public comment, but we are, and we will, and we'll continue to do that. So I appreciate that you want to see if we can get past this divisiveness and mistrust, but I do think we have taken many first steps, and I think we need a little transparency because we know there's more to the story than is being said in this public meeting.
Well, there's always 3 and 4 sides to every story. So yeah, just wondering how we can, anyways, it's something to think about between now and the next meeting. Because I personally am getting a lot of negative emails, and it's not being balanced out by positive emails. So it's not a popularity contest, but it is concerning to me as a council member that those are the letters and the emails that I'm fielding. So just thinking about ways that that we can do better, I guess, or do different, maybe. So that's all. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, I think historically this issue has been very contentious. I mean, the contract in 2018 was a contentious process. There was a lot of community healing and recognition when the old contractor was replaced. And I think we're seeing some of that residual effect tonight, and we have for the past couple months. But for over 2 years, largely these meetings haven't had a lot of negative comments of the work of North Bay Animal Services, and I think they're doing a great job. And we can talk about that during our own comment period. So I think let's try to wrap this agenda item up, and then we can move on. Any other comment on this agenda item from committee members? Okay. Seeing no further comment, we will move to the next agenda item, which is item 8C, which is an update on the financial audit from 2018 to 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Chair. Just wanted to give a quick update, and Sue alluded to this at the beginning of her annual report, but we are, or NBAS, I should say, is in the process of completing the financial audit through a CPA firm. We reported out in January that they were working on both the 2019 and 2020 financials to get those audited and get up to current, up to speed. At that meeting, the committee requested that they also include 2018, which only had 5 months from August through December, but we wanted to get a complete picture of the financials. And so NBAS went back to their CPA got an updated contract, got them the additional data, and the CPA has been working on that piece as well. We were hoping to have the audit done by about April 15th so that we would be ready for this meeting. However, the CPA has needed a little more time to get that done. And so I think our new timeline is looking to be around the end of May. And so once we have that finalized, the audit for all 3 of those years done, we can post that publicly, email it out to the committee, and then agendize it for a discussion in August. Going forward, I believe that the May meeting is probably a good timeline for future years to be able to review the annual audit in the future, because there will only be 1 year of data for the CPA to audit. So just wanted to give a kind of a status update for the public and for the committee on that process.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Does North Bay Animal Services have anything to add to that? Okay, we'll move on to any questions from the committee members before we take public comment. Okay, no questions or comments. We'll move on to public comment for this agenda item.
Thank you. Those wishing to participate in public comment must raise a virtual hand and wait to be called on by the moderator. Speakers are reminded to be respectful in their comments. Threats of violence and obscenity are grounds for removal from this meeting. A countdown will appear for the convenience of the speaker and viewers. Your microphone will be muted at the end of that countdown. The first speaker will be acknowledged and invited to speak with the when the countdown begins. Please make sure to unmute yourself when you're invited to do so. Just a reminder, this public comment is in regards to the update just provided on the financial audit. We have one speaker with their hand raised. Sale, I'll now allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and begin.
Hi, thank you so much. And yeah, I wanted to just reflect what Councilmember Delinda Fisher had said, that it seems that if you're storing this information in a QuickBooks format, you know, in a normal accounting format.
Ms. White,
Yes?
you have to stick to the agenda item, please.
The agenda item is regarding the budget, which is that it seems that if you're
Ms.
going
White.
to... Excuse me?
The agenda item is in regards to the financial audit update that was just provided.
Financial audit update. It seems that it would be very simple to provide a financial audit if the information was stored in a QuickBooks format. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Acting Chair Alonso, that was the last speaker we have.
Thank you, Aaron. And public comment is closed on that agenda item. Any other further question or comment from committee members or staff? And seeing no further comment, we will move on to the next agenda item, which is 8D, which is discussion of process for updates from North Bay Animal Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wanted to just have a little discussion. One of the committee members had asked over the past few months of staff, as a few of these emails or questions or complaints have come in, and often the committee members are copied on them or are directly emailed. And so we wanted to try to brainstorm a process where if a committee member would like kind of a public explanation or comment back at a future meeting, that they're able to request that. And so trying to respect both the Brown Act and not commenting on items that are not agendized, but also wanting to get updated information and allowing NBAS some time if they need to research a particular issue or get additional data before responding. So wanted to throw that out there for discussion. I think a process that would work would be if a committee member sees a particular email or complaint come through that they would like to get some explanation on, they could email staff, meaning myself, Susie Terry, our executive assistant to the city manager, to request a public update on a particular item. We can then forward that request to NBAS. They can gather any data or info that is needed, and then we can agendize that in a communications item section within the upcoming agenda. so that that item will be agendized and we can have some explanation or some commentary from NBAS. So that's just an outline of the process. And I don't know if Sue or Mark had any other insight on what they think would work.
Yeah, I think, you know, we're not experts in the Brown Act, and we're not experts in some of the city rules and regulations, but what our end goal is to make sure that we're keeping the public and we're keeping the city informed about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And that includes to respond to public records requests or the informal public records requests. I consider them pretty much the same in terms of trying to get information out to the public and keeping you all informed about what's happening. So if it's appropriate to have a section in the meeting that reviews communications that you've received that you want the public to know the outcome of, that makes sense. You know, we just would need some time to put together responses. So yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely worth a try. We're open to whatever is going to make you guys comfortable and what keeps us in line with some of the official regulations.
Sounds good. Thank you. Any questions or comments based on the proposal from the Assistant City Manager? Okay, I think what you've outlined, Brian, makes sense, and I think that that'll work. I think my only 2 cents would be that, you know, all committee members are included once final communication goes out at the end, so we're all kept in the loop if one committee member requests something or the like, just so we're all on the same page. Okay, we will open up public comment specifically on this agenda item. And if Aaron could handle that, that would be great.
Thank you. Those wishing to participate in public comment must raise their virtual hand and wait to be called on by the moderator. Speakers are reminded to be respectful in their comments. Threats of violence and obscenity are grounds for removal from this meeting. A countdown will appear for the convenience of the speaker and viewers. Your microphone will be muted at the end of that countdown. The first speaker will be acknowledged and invited to speak when the countdown begins. Please make sure to unmute yourself when you're invited to do so. Just a reminder, this agenda item is specifically on the communication and discussion of process for requesting updates from North Bay Animal Services. At this point, we have 2 members of the public with their hands raised. The first speaker will be Sale. I'll now allow you to speak, and you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm hoping this is a response to the correct item, but I did make a number of public records requests, and it did take far more than the legal required 10 days to have those fulfilled, with many runarounds and changes. And it was bothersome to me indeed. And that's my comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next speaker that we have is Amy Taylor. I will now allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and begin.
Thank you. I'm just wondering what the turnaround is for when you do a records request. Is that 10 days? Because I sent one in 2018 and have yet to hear back. Samantha got back to me saying that it was going to be sent to Sue Davy and everything was going to be investigated, and I haven't heard one thing, and I resent it several times, but it just sort of seems like they want you to give up and they don't want the truth to come out about a dead cat in the river that a homeless person killed. And Mark was on scene, and haven't heard back from them from 2018. And so what's the turnaround? Isn't there a law on that? Thank you.
Thank you. Acting Chair Alonso, at this point, we do not have another speaker.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. We will close public comment on that item and bring it back to committee. Any other comments from committee members or staff based on public comment or any other? Okay, we will move on.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, yep.
Sorry, Brian, one more time. I did want to make a brief comment. Yes, the specific request, I believe that Ms. White was referring to, we did acknowledge that was, that got dropped and that was an accident and that was a staff, we just missed it. And I believe we have since responded to Ms. White. So that is definitely, that was an issue and I hope that we've corrected that. So it's not the intent to have a multi-month delay. So I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that. The second question or comment, I would just offer overall, we have been actively working as a staff with the city attorney's office, as well as North Bay Animal Services to streamline and to improve the public records request process. I know they have met recently, and I think that was a productive meeting to assist with some of these requests moving forward. So I would encourage anybody, if you do have a public records request, you can submit it to the city clerk's office, and they will work directly with NBAS to coordinate getting that response. So not sure what happened back in 2018, but hopefully we can get those questions answered if the request is resubmitted. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for that update, Assistant City Manager. And we will now move on to agenda item number 9, which is committee comment. And we'll start with Councilmember Fisher.
I don't think I have any. I think I've said plenty tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see, next on my screen, I see Jessica. Would you like to add any other comments or questions for this evening?
I just appreciate us addressing sort of these emails that come in and how can we address them as a committee in a way that still falls within all of these rules. So thank you guys for speaking to that. I really do appreciate that.
Thank you. Amber.
Thank you. I would like to say thank you to the team at North Bay for the fact that they're working without volunteers and continuing to listen to our requests and information and trying to get as much out there as we can, knowing that you're working under a difficult time with less hands than usual.
Thank you, Amber. And I think this might be the longest committee meeting we've had since I've joined the committee in 2019. I thought it was a great discussion. And I think there's just so many important issues to discuss and share with the community, especially around data and operations. And I think it's important that folks see it and they hear directly from staff and North Bay Animal Services, because as Amber mentioned, there's so much important work going on that we just may not see on a day-to-day level, especially with COVID. So I just want to thank the team here and the city staff for getting us here tonight. And I thought we had a really fruitful discussion. Chair Quinn is going to have a long meeting to watch at some future date, but I'm sure she'll enjoy it. And I think with that, we will adjourn. And our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, August 11th, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. So thank you very much for coming and good evening.